In this module, we are going to talk about an important part for web development, especially when we talk about client-side development. We are talking about browser object model. Maybe like the term is not that familiar to everybody. Maybe if we mention something like document object model, it's gonna be more familiar, since like most of the people they are used to work with. But in fact, browser object model is more broader than just like dealing with a document. So what are the objectives for this module? After completion of this module, you should be able to understand different objects that browser provider and how to interact with these browser objects API. So let's start with like what is a browser object model. So the browser object model, each browser provide tons of information that a web developer can use to achieve a specific task. So for example, back in the day, we used to have like, let's say, interaction boxes such as alert box, or let's say confirm or confirmation box. Whenever you wanted to perform some action, then you will ask to like for confirmation from the end user. All this stuff cannot be done through HTML or CSS. It must be done through one of the programming languages. In another word, the browser in your device provide an API to this kind, or to consume this kind of information, or to interact with these kind of objects. And to be able to work with this kind of objects, you have to be able to work with one of or you have to interact with it through one of the web or any programming language. So for example, let's say if you have a browser and you want to get some information from that browser, you can use any programming language, since the browser object model is an interface. It provides an API for the end user. So the main browser, let me just like try. The main browser is providing like the browser window is the main object, and the browser object model, it has like some children, and some of these children has some of let's say sub children. So in general, browser object model is hierarchical in nature. That means some of the objects that has some children, and the start always as, or let's say we can call it the root object, is the window. So when we talk about the window, then there are like some API that we can use to perform specific actions. And we will see, like, I prefer, like in this chapter, I made everything as code, so you can just like see it by yourself and you can get the experience of it. Okay, so another object that like is provided by browser object model, or BOM, is a document, where you can manage all the elements in that document. When we talk about documents, we are talking about you can manipulate HTML, you can manipulate CSS after it's been downloaded in the browser. Okay, and this is like the level of interactivity that JavaScript provide to you and help with like using the browser object model. In the frames, we have some tasks that we or let's say some information that we can gather from there. We have information about location, history, navigator, all these kind of browser object model, and we will see it like as a live demonstration here for most of them. So let's check the first one, which is the window. Most of the time, like you've seen this kind of alert box, which is part of the window, and you've seen this before. Let's see one more thing here. Let's try to open this file in the code. So in the code here, most of the time, you would have something like a confirmation. This is like one of the things that we use. A prompt. This is another thing that we usually use. Alert, that you already like seen before. All these functions or API is part of the window object. Okay, so this is like one of the things that you may do. It's true that like most people right now do not use this kind of stuff. They're blessed with something we call it model, but it's still in place. It's still there. If you want to use it, you may use it. But these are some like, even like, let's say here, we like for simplicity, we are using alert, but it should be something like this. Window dot alert. And if you can see here, if we write window dot, you can see all the things that you can do through this object. You can show like a port controller, you can do animation, you can do multiple of stuff. As you can see, it provides a lot of functionalities that you may use based on the scenario that you are trying to work with. So like for short, the object window provide everything related to the browser itself. Okay, so another object that BOM or browser object model provide is the location. So the location here, let me show you here one thing here. So I wrote just like console log location. If you recall from the code or let's say the chapter when we talked about the DNS, and we said like in DNS we have the path name, we have the domain name, all these kind of stuff. You still can use all these stuff from and acquire all this information from the website. So here, let's go with inspect, and if we go to console, we can see everything related to this object, all the functionalities and the features that this object provide to us. And you can see here, since it's just like a local file here, you'll not be able to see like the host name, all this stuff. But if it's there on or let's say it's hosted on one of the websites, then you will see what is the host name, what is the path name that it's been used, what kind of protocols. If you are using HTTP, you will see it from here. So if your code is relying or built on the top of one of these logics, then you may acquire this information and build your application on the top of these API or objects. So another object that browser provide, which is the history, which is like a direct implementation of the history of your browser. So let's say from here, if we like say these are like the history pages, the back and the forward. So if we are here, we click like on dev 3, for example. I moved here to dev 3, right? Then I can just like go back. I can move forward. And as you can see, these buttons here is consuming one of these objects. As you can see here, add to history. I'm adding to the history, all this kind of stuff, adding to history. But here is how to interact with these, let's say, entries. So you may fire the action of back, which is equivalent to click on back here. As you can see here, let's update this one. As you can see here, now the forward is enabled since we already added something to the history stack, as you can see. So it has the same functionality, as you can see. So either you click from here or to click from here, it's going to give you the same functionality. Okay, so back here, it's almost the same thing as go -1 or go 1. So one main difference here between just using back and forward. Back and forward, it's either to get you back one step or move you forward one step. But with go, you can just like specify which step you want to go back to. So the way that history works, it's like stack. Whenever you visit a new web page, then it's gonna be added on the top. And this is like what have we done here. So whenever you click on one of these pages, we'll update the history stack with this information, as you can see here. This is like the way, if you wanted to implement your own history implementation using the API of history, you can use it this way. So this is really useful when you are working with a kind of projects or browsers, or let's say an application. They call it SPA, or single page application. When you don't want the user to just like use the back and the forward buttons there, then you may use this kind of implementation. So another one, or another object that the window or the browser provide to you, is the screen. So the screen can provide you like with many applications. Okay, so it can give you like what is the exact height and the exact width of the web page. You can do just like multiple stuff. As you can see here, I can tell that the available width is 1200 and the available height is 600. If you want to expand, you want to restore, all these kind of functionalities, you can just like perform it through the screen API. And as you can see here, it's not that hard to work with screen in reality. Okay, it's not that hard. I will try to push all these codes to you guys, so you can just like try to work these things out. But as I said, it's not that hard to work with. It's super easy to read. Anything that starts with screen here in this file, it should be something like, or something related to the screen object, which is part of the browser objects. So another important object that's really important when you are working with web application is the navigator, which is going to give you like more information about the environment that the user use. Okay, so let's try to run this one to see. So you can get like the connection information, what kind of information or what kind of connection that the user has, and what are the supported languages, to check if the cookies are enabled or not enabled on the client side. So let's say based on like the scenario you have, you wanted to check whether to enable the like, let's say you wanna to get some information from the cookies, okay, and you are not sure whether the user browser support cookies or not. You may discover that through the navigator. And if you can here, let's do one thing here, which is console.log navigator. And as I said, like always, you can just like do navigator dots, and you can see everything that this object provides to you. Okay, so for this page, let's see, this is like everything that the navigator, as you can see, I'm using like the app code name, what kind of application name, the version I'm using, whether there's like Bluetooth, clipboard, everything related to the user environment, you may use it from here. As you can see, all these kind of stuff it has like really usefulness here if you wanted to build something on the top of it. Okay, so after that, which is like the main and the most important part, which is the document object, or this guy here, because this is like the most valuable part, and most of the time you're gonna spend like most of your time trying to manipulate these kind of stuff. So let's see here what we have. Let's first check the code. So for this one, you can go and get like the domain name. You can get with the URL. You can go and fetch any value of any HTML tag you have. So the way that this working, as you can see here, the document is just a tree of different objects. If you recall that we had like when we talked about the structure of any HTML page, we said we have head area, we have body area, and when you wanted to show something on the body area, you will add your objects there in the body. So everything should be in a tree. Okay, so for example, you have applets, you have anchors, you have flyers, links. All these tags, the tags that we learned before, are or could be represented as an array of objects. So let's see here, try to understand what's going on here. So as you can see, this is like the title or the value of the title, which is the same thing as you can see here. This is the title, and this is the URL, which is, as you can see, it's almost the same thing. If you wanted to get like only the head section, you can get the head section. If you want to get the body section, so when you're trying to get the body section, you will get all the children of the body section. As you can see here in the body, you can see everything as a children for all these sections. Okay, and here you can go through every one of these tags, and you can just like, as you can see, there's tons of information and things that you can manipulate using this API. Okay, so one of the main things that you would usually work with, which is the class list, where you can add class on the fly, or you can just like update the content on the fly, or even like manipulate style through the style attribute of any HTML. Okay, so one of the main things that you would usually do when you are working with document, which is in this case, in our case here, in most cases, in the static pages, before that we use any JavaScript, when you download or your load of your web page is done, then you cannot update the content or you cannot update the style of the web page no matter what, because it's just like one time loading. So the JavaScript, with using DOM, you may be able to update the content of the page even after you populate this page. So in this example, as we can see here, we have this table here, and as you can see, there's no style for it. What if we wanted to change the style after we download the page? Or let's say if you wanted to perform this style change based on a specific event. Let's say if the user click on a change style, you will change the style. So this is really super easy to do it through JavaScript and DOM. As you can see here, if we click change style, as you can see, we had like a completely different style that we may use. So the way it's working here, it's not that complicated really. So let me try to open the code for you here. Here, the first part here, or the most important part here, is to know how to access the tag that you want to change. So let's say this is like the table that we have. Okay, so to be able to change these let's say rows, you have to be able to identify and to know where is it located at. So in this case, we are using something like ID, and we set the ID to a specific unique ID. So for example, the first row, we call it row 1. The second row, we call it row 2. And from 3, we call it row 3. And same thing with 4 here. So to be able to access one of these identifiable elements, then we may go with this function that's document object provide. So document, we can use get element by ID. So it's like, I think like it's readable, it's easy to understand. So if you wanted to let's say access the element through the ID, then you may use something like this, and you just like write the name of the tag. So here, since I'm just like wanted to change everything, then I had like a dynamic way of selecting the ID. But if you just like wanted, let's say if you have span ID, then we wanted to have, let's say, test. Then you can do something like this: document dot get element by ID, then test, and from here you can do anything related to it. So we know that one of the classes or one of the attributes for this specific tag is classes. So we can just like do class, as you can see, class name. Or if you wanted to see and check what kind of classes do you have, you can do something like this. But if you want to change the style, you may do something like style. And from style, you can do like any CSS style. Let's say if you want to change the color, if you want to change the background color, let's say the background color. As you can see, the difference here between this one and the one you know about CSS is, in CSS, you'll find something like this: background color. So everything that has hyphen in between in CSS is going to be something like, you will remove the hyphen and you will start with a capital letter here. Okay, so this is the way it's working. It shouldn't be that hard. It's super easy once you grasp the concept behind it. So here what I'm done is I'm selecting the row, then I'm using the style attribute to change the background color. So in case of odd and even, let's say number, then I'm gonna change or assign different color for odd rows and different color for even rows. Okay, so this is like the way, or let's say the most common way to try to access one of the objects is through using get element by ID. Okay, but this is not the only way. You can just like go with tag name, or even like by name. So for example, let's see the one in here. So when we are working with the name, get element by name, we are talking about the attribute name, as like the ID was the ID attribute, the name is by the name attribute. And even you can do something like, I believe, document dot get element by class name, because these are the identifiable attributes that you may use to identify one of the elements within HTML. As you can see here, you may like get the document or the objects or the elements of HTML through the ID or the class name, or by the name attributes, or by the tag name itself, or this one, I forgot what is it, but there's like another way to do it. Okay, so these are the things that you may try to access the document or specific elements using a document object. So in this implementation, I'm just like using one thing. When a user clicks on all keywords here, it's gonna highlight or check all these stuff, as you can see here. And the way it's working, it's, as I said, it's not that complicated. I'm just like doing one thing, get the name or get all the checkbox using the language name. And as you can see, the name here, they are all the same name. And I just like change a check here. If it's checkbox, then just like add the attributes of checked, set as true. So what I'm doing here is almost something like this. So let's say, let me copy this one here. So right now, it's gonna be something like this. If I added here checked, after performing these two lines, it's gonna be something like this. To see the results here, let me show you. Let's see. Let's say it's here checked. As you can see, by default it's checked. You see? Now you can just like perform some actions like this. When we are talking about like the tags, you may do the same thing, but instead of just like try to access through one of the attributes, you will access through one of the tag name. So if I want to get a list of all the tags, and this is really important, especially when you are you want to work with, let's say, if you want to change the style of all the links in your website. So it's easy to do it this way, to go with get element by tag name, and you get a list of all these, let's say, tag, which is the anchor tag, and change the style of it. Here, I'm just like doing one thing, which is if it's odd, it's gonna have one color. If it's even, it's gonna have a different color. As you can see here, I just like added these links as either it's odd or even. I assign different color. So just change the style is not the only thing that you can do, but I'm here just like trying to come up with something that you can see with your own eyes. Okay, so this is like the most important part that you should be able to understand about, let's say, browser object model, and how to get the benefits of all these API to serve you better as a web developer. So the last part of this, let's say, module, which is a form validation. It's not really part of the browser object model, but it's really related to it. Usually, you will use this techniques that we already explained here to perform form validation. But the thing is, before we know how to achieve such a thing, let's like just assume one thing. Do not assume the code coming from the client user is not malicious code. So in another word, do not assume that the good guy, he's the one who's trying to interact with your website. As a best practice, always assume that the end user that he's going to use your web application is a bad guy. So always let's say, assume that any data coming from the user is malicious code. In this case, you have to do the validation all the time. You cannot just like say, as a web developer, you cannot just like say, you know what, this application is going to be built for employee inside the company. There's no people's going to access it. Do not do that. All the time, validation and sanitizing your input is an important part that you have to do it, no matter what, who's your target on. Okay, so as I said, it's good practice to perform the form validation before sending the data and overwhelm your backend with another set of validation, but still it's not enough. So in most cases, you will do two kinds of validation. The first one, or let's say two steps of validation. The first step is going to be about, or let's say on the front end side or on the client side, where you wanted to validate whether all the requirements has fulfilled or not before the data will be sent to the backend. This validation is only usable or useful because of the usability of your website, to increase the usability. So it's not good idea to just like send your data to the backend to come back with a response message that you are missing something from your input. Okay, so the first line of validation is going to be at the front end side or at the client side, which is going to at least apply some of the validation to make sure everything you need is there. Then once it's there, you can just like have another validation on the backend. And the reason to have another backend validation, even though it's like sometimes going to be almost the same code, but the most important part is don't trust that the data that is coming to your backend is going to be coming from your actual form. It might be coming from different form, or even like man in the middle has been like injected some of the malicious code within the data that is coming to your website. That's why you have to perform two lines of validation here. So to perform a validation, there are like two types or two ways to perform validation. The first one, which is provided by HTML5, which is built-in validation mechanism that you can just like check whether like a specific field, let's say, is it like the user, did he enter something in it or not, or did he type something in it or not? You can verify or validate the minimum length or the maximum length for text, or to use the min and max for numbers. You can perform validation on the type, whether it's like the entry data is, let's say, is it date, is it color, or what kind of validation you are trying to do based on the type. The last one, which is like the most complicated one, which is like based on the pattern, which is using regular expression, where you can perform some advanced matching in this area. So if like HTML5 provide all these kind of validation, why do we need to use JS? To answer that, we need to understand that with JavaScript, you can just like build your own validation from scratch, and you can do almost everything, because if you're gonna use HTML5, you're gonna use it as it is. You cannot just like extend it. You cannot just like do extra validation on the top of it. But when you are using your validation in JS, you may just like build your own. You can even use some of the libraries that it's used to perform this kind of validation. And even there, like if you're gonna use a pre-made libraries, you still can go and extend this validation to help you better. So let's say here, Yes, let me show you the code for it. As you can see, all I had here is just like the required, just to make sure all the entries here will be entered by the end user. So if I'm trying to do send, as you can see, it's gonna pop up this, please fill out this field. All this stuff you can, but it's not straightforward to extend it and update all this kind of stuff. But here, let's say you entered something in here, you can see since it's email, as you can see here in the code, it's email. The type is email. So it's going to perform the actions that it's required for email. So I have to include, let's say, as you can see here, and the type, based on the type, since I already have URL, you cannot just like fill anything here. Please enter URL. So you have to write it in right way. Okay, so this is how it's done in HTML5. You can say min length, let's say 10. You can see, please lengthen this text to 10 characters. So you can perform some of these validation. So the other way to do the validation here is using form validation. And to make a form validation, you can use something like, let's say, based on the event, let's say when the user clicks on submit, you can just like do the validation. So let's try to do one thing here. So here, if you try to send, it's going to tell you the error. You can here, in this case, you can create your own error area, and you can just like show the error as you go. So the way I created this one, I already created this div here and make it as the display. I said the display attribute in CSS as none. Okay. So by default, let's say here, if you're gonna go to check the code, this div is already there, but I'm gonna only show it if there is a problem with the let's say with the field. If it's not, then it's gonna be hidden forever. So here, let's say if we assume something like this, you can see it's okay. We can just like send the parameter. But if it's not, then I'm just like gonna show. All I'm gonna do here is just like change the style from none to block, and that's it. As you can see here, get element by ID, error, style, display, and make it block. Here it's none by default. If there is an error, then I'm gonna just change the display style, and that's it. So this is like the way you can create your own form validation. You can perform any kind of validation. So using JavaScript might give you like better, let's say, flexibility, better control, more power of your validation mechanism. Okay. At the end of this chapter, I hope this helped you a lot. Make sure to practice all these things, because it's really important part as you go with like your web development career. Thank you, and I'll see you all in next chapters.